How dare you show your face here? I spat, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart pounded as I faced Sophie, my twin sister, standing on my porch with that same smug look she wore 13 years ago. The one that said she always got what she wanted, especially when it was mine. "Emma, please, just hear me out," Sophie pleaded, her voice a mix of desperation and defiance. "It's been years. Can't we talk?" I crossed my arms, my eyes narrowing. "Talk? You want to talk now? After you stole my husband and ruined my life?" Sophie flinched, but she didn't back down. "James and we need your help." "Help?" I laughed bitterly. "You must be out of your mind." As if on cue, James appeared from behind Sophie, his once confident demeanor now shadowed by regret. "Emma, we wouldn't be here if we weren't desperate." I felt a surge of anger, the audacity of them standing there, asking for help after everything they'd done. Desperate? You think I care about your desperation? "Emma, please." James began, but I cut him off. "Don't you, Emma, please me, James. You made your bed. Now lie in it." Suddenly, the door behind me opened, and Sam stepped out, his presence a calming force. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his hand gently resting on my shoulder. "Everything's fine," I said through gritted teeth. "Just a couple of ghosts from the past." Sam looked at Sophie and James, his expression unreadable. "Maybe we should take this inside," he suggested. I wanted to protest, but the look in Sam's eyes told me he thought it was the best course of action. Reluctantly, I stepped aside, allowing Sophie and James into our home. As they entered, I couldn't help but notice how out of place they looked. Our cozy suburban townhouse in Springfield was a stark contrast to the chaos they brought with them. "Nice place," Sophie remarked, her eyes scanning the living room. "Cut to the chase, Sophie," I snapped. "What do you want?" Sophie took a deep breath. "We need money. We're in a bad spot, and we have nowhere else to turn." I felt a bitter satisfaction at their predicament. "And you think I should help you because we're family," James said quietly. "Family?" I echoed, incredulous. "You stopped being family the moment you betrayed me." "Emma," Sam interjected, his voice calm but firm. "Let's hear them out." I shot him a look but nodded. "Fine. Talk." Sophie glanced at James before speaking. "We're broke. James lost his job, and we've been struggling to make ends meet. We're about to lose our house. And you think I should care because?" I repeated, my patience wearing thin. "Because I'm pregnant," Sophie blurted out. A stunned silence filled the room. I looked at her, searching for any sign of deceit. "Pregnant? Are you serious?" "Yes," she said, her eyes pleading. "We need your help, Emma. Please." I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion. But above all, I felt the weight of the decision before me. Could I really turn my back on them, even after everything? Before I could respond, Ben came running into the room, his 8-year-old energy filling the space. "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" "Nothing, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Just some old friends visiting." Ben looked at Sophie and James curiously. "Who are they?" "They're family," I said reluctantly. "Family?" Ben repeated, looking confused. "Yes, family," Sam said, his hand still on my shoulder. "And sometimes family needs help." I looked at Sam, feeling a mix of gratitude and frustration. He was right, of course. But that didn't make it any easier. "All right," I said finally, turning to Sophie and James. "We'll talk. But don't think for a second that I've forgotten what you did." Sophie nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Emma. You won't regret this." I wasn't so sure. But for now, I had no choice but to let them in and see what the future held. I stood in the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air, trying to wrap my head around the events of the previous evening. Sophie and James back in my life asking for help. It was like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. "Mom, can I have pancakes?" Ben's cheerful voice broke through my thoughts. "Sure, sweetheart," I replied, forcing a smile. "Why don't you go set the table?" As Ben ran off, Sam walked in, his brow furrowed. "You okay?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me. I leaned into his embrace. I don't know. I just can't believe they're here, asking for help. Maybe it's a chance to finally get some closure, Sam suggested gently. Or it's a chance for them to mess up my life again, I countered. Before Sam could respond, the doorbell rang. I tensed, fearing it was Sophie and James again. But when I opened the door, it was my mother, Patricia. "Morning, Emma," she greeted, her warm smile a welcome sight. "I thought I'd drop by and see how you're doing." "Come in, Mom," I said, stepping aside. "You won't believe who's back in town." Patricia's eyes widened as she took a seat at the kitchen table. "Don't tell me. Sophie and James." "Yes," I confirmed, pouring her a cup of coffee. "They showed up last night asking for help." Patricia sighed, shaking her head. "That girl, always causing trouble." "I don't know what to do, Mom," I admitted, sitting across from her. "Part of me wants to help, but another part of me wants nothing to do with them." "You're a good person, Emma," Patricia said, reaching out to hold my hand. "But don't let them take advantage of you again." "I won't," I promised, though I wasn't entirely sure how I'd manage that. Just then, Ben came running back into the kitchen. "Grandma, are you staying for breakfast?" "Of course, darling," Patricia replied, ruffling his hair. "I wouldn't miss it." As we ate breakfast, the tension from the night before began to fade, replaced by the comforting routine of family life. But it wasn't long before the peace was shattered. "Emma, we need to talk," Sophie said, appearing in the doorway with James by her side. I stood up, my jaw clenched. "What now?" "We need to explain," James began, but Sophie cut him off. "James, let me handle this," she said, turning to me. "Emma, I know you don't trust us, but we really are in a bad spot." "And whose fault is that?" I snapped. "You made your choices, Sophie. Now you have to live with them." "Please, Emma," Sophie pleaded, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm pregnant. We have nowhere else to go." I looked at her, trying to see past the lies and manipulation. Was she telling the truth this time? "Emma," Patricia said softly, placing a hand on my arm, "maybe you should hear them out." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. "Fine, but this better be good." Sophie and James exchanged a glance before Sophie spoke. "We lost everything, Emma. The house, the car, everything. James lost his job, and we couldn't keep up with the bills. And now you're pregnant," I said, my voice cold. "Convenient timing." "It's the truth," James insisted. "We wouldn't be here if we had any other option." I looked at Sam, who nodded slightly, his eyes encouraging me to give them a chance. "All right," I said finally. "We'll help you. But there are going to be conditions." "Anything," Sophie said quickly. "We'll do whatever it takes. First, you need to find a job, both of you," I said firmly. "And you can't stay here. We'll help you find a place. But you need to start taking responsibility for your lives." "Thank you, Emma," James said, his relief palpable. "Don't thank me yet," I warned. "This is your last chance. Don't blow it." As Sophie and James left, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and a glimmer of hope. Maybe this time things would be different. But I wasn't holding my breath. The following morning, I was still trying to process everything when Sam and I sat down to discuss the next steps. We needed to find a place for Sophie and James, and fast. "There's a rental down the street that's been vacant for a while," Sam suggested, sipping his coffee. "I could call the landlord and see if it's available." "That sounds like a good idea," I replied, feeling a bit more hopeful. "But they need jobs too. We can't support them indefinitely." "I'll talk to a few people at work," Sam offered. "Maybe someone has some leads." "Thanks, Sam," I said, grateful for his support. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "We're a team," he reminded me, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. Just as we were finishing breakfast, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sophie standing there, looking more disheveled than ever. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sure," I said, stepping aside. "What's going on?" "I don't know how to say this," Sophie began, her eyes darting around nervously. But I think I'm being followed. Followed? I echoed, my heart sinking. By who? I don't know, she admitted, wringing her hands. But I keep seeing the same car everywhere I go. It's like they're watching me. Why would anyone be following you? Sam asked, his brow furrowed. I don't know, Sophie repeated, tears welling up in her eyes. But I'm scared, Emma. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. All right, let's think this through. Have you noticed anything else unusual? No, just the car, Sophie replied, her voice trembling. James doesn't believe me, but I know what I saw. We'll figure this out. I promised, though I had no idea how. As Sophie sat down at the kitchen table, I glanced at Sam, who nodded. I'll call the police and see if they can send someone to check it out, he said, heading for the phone. Thank you, Sophie whispered, her shoulders slumping in relief. While Sam made the call, I sat down next to Sophie. Is there anything else you haven't told me? I asked gently. Sophie hesitated, then shook her head. No, that's it. All right, I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. We'll get through this. A few minutes later, Sam returned. The police are sending someone over to take a statement, he said. In the meantime, we'll keep an eye out and make sure you're safe. Thank you, Sophie said again, her voice barely audible. As we waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Sophie had always been reckless, but this seemed different. More dangerous. When the police arrived, Sophie gave her statement, describing the car and the times she'd seen it. The officer took notes, promising to keep an eye out and follow up if they found anything. After they left, I turned to Sophie. You can stay here for now, I said, though the words felt heavy in my mouth. But we need to find you a place soon. I understand, Sophie replied, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Emma. As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Something about Sophie's story didn't add up, and I couldn't help but wonder what she was hiding. That evening, as I was tucking Ben into bed, he looked up at me with wide eyes. Mom, is Aunt Sophie going to be okay? I hope so, sweetheart, I said, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. We're doing everything we can to help her. Okay, Ben said, snuggling into his blankets. I love you, Mom. I love you too, Ben, I replied, kissing his forehead. Good night. As I closed his door, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The day had been long and filled with more questions than answers. I headed downstairs, finding Sam waiting for me in the living room. How's Ben? He asked, pulling me into a comforting embrace. He's worried, I admitted, resting my head on his shoulder. I am too. We'll get through this, Sam said, his voice steady and reassuring. Together. I nodded, though the knot in my stomach remained. As we sat together, the weight of the situation pressing down on us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. And whatever was coming next, we would have to face it head-on. The next day, I woke up with a sense of foreboding. Something felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the situation with Sophie and James was about to get worse. I decided to confront them directly and get to the bottom of things. Sophie, we need to talk, I said, finding her in the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea. She looked up, eyes red-rimmed. What is it? Are you really pregnant? I asked bluntly, cutting to the chase. Sophie hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I am. Can you prove it? I pressed. A doctor's note, an ultrasound, anything? Her face crumpled and she looked away. I don't have anything like that yet. But I swear, Emma, I'm telling the truth. I sighed, frustration bubbling up inside me. You have to understand why it's hard for me to believe you, given our history. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I'm not lying this time. Before I could respond, James walked in, tension radiating from him. What's going on? I was just asking Sophie about her pregnancy, I said, my eyes never leaving his face. I want proof. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. Emma, I know we haven't given you any reason to trust us, but this is real. We're in trouble, and we need your help. Then help me help you, I said, my voice firm. Be honest with me. James looked at Sophie, then back at me. All right, there's something else you should know. I crossed my arms, waiting. Go on. The reason we lost everything, it wasn't just because I lost my job, James admitted, his voice low. We got involved with some people. Bad people. And now they're after us. My heart sank. What kind of people? Loan sharks, Sophie said quietly. We borrowed money to keep up with the bills, but we couldn't pay it back. Now they're threatening us. Why didn't you tell me this before? I demanded, anger rising. You put us all in danger. We were scared, James said, his voice breaking. We didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath, trying to process this new information. All right, we'll figure this out. But you need to be honest with me from now on. No more secrets. We promise, Sophie said, her voice trembling. Just then Sam walked in, his face pale. Emma, we need to talk. Now. I followed him into the living room, my heart pounding. What is it? I just got a call from the police, Sam said, his voice tight. They found the car that's been following Sophie. It's registered to a known criminal. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means they're serious, Sam said grimly. We need to be careful. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. What are we going to do? We'll figure it out, Sam said, his voice steady. But we need to keep an eye on Sophie and James. We can't let them out of our sight. I nodded, my mind racing. All right. We'll do whatever it takes to keep everyone safe. As we rejoined Sophie and James in the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. But I knew we had to face it head-on together. Listen, I said, addressing Sophie and James. The police found the car. It's bad news. We need to be extra careful. Sophie paled, her hand going to her stomach. What are we going to do? We'll figure it out, I said, echoing Sam's words. But you need to stay here, where we can keep an eye on you. Thank you, James said, his voice filled with relief. We won't let you down. You better not, I replied, my voice hard. Because if you do, there won't be a next time. As the day wore on, the tension in the house was palpable. We were all on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I couldn't help but wonder what else Sophie and James were hiding. That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, Sam pulled me into his arms. We'll get through this, he said softly. I know, I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure. But it's going to be a long road. We'll walk it together, Sam said, kissing my forehead. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. And whatever was coming next, we would have to face it head-on together. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination. We needed to get to the bottom of this mess, and that meant taking action. After breakfast, Sam and I sat down with Sophie and James to discuss our next steps. We need to figure out exactly who these people are and what they want, I said, looking directly at James. You said they were loan sharks. Do you know their names? James nodded, looking ashamed. Yeah, the main guy is called Tony Russo. He's bad news, Emma. Really bad news. How much do you owe him? Sam asked, his voice steady but serious. $20,000, James admitted, his eyes downcast. I felt a surge of anger. How could you let it get this bad? We didn't have a choice, Sophie said, her voice breaking. We were drowning in debt, and they offered us a way out. But now you're in even deeper. I pointed out, my frustration mounting. Emma, we need to find a way to pay them back, Sam said, his hand on my arm. But we also need to keep everyone safe. How are we supposed to come up with that kind of money? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. We'll figure it out, Sam said, his voice calm and reassuring. But first, we need to make sure Tony Russo and his men don't come near this house. Just then, the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat as I went to answer it. Standing on the porch was Patricia, her expression a mix of concern and determination. Mom, what are you doing here? I asked, stepping aside to let her in. I heard about Sophie and James, she said, her voice firm. I came to help. How did you find out? I asked, surprised. Word gets around, Patricia replied, her eyes narrowing. And I have my ways. Mom, this is serious, I said, leading her into the living room. They're in deep trouble with loan sharks. I know, Patricia said, her voice softening. And that's why I'm here. We need to come up with a plan. As we sat down to discuss our options, I felt a glimmer of hope. With Patricia's help, maybe we could find a way out of this mess. First, we need to contact the police and let them know about Tony Russo, Patricia said, her tone assertive. They might be able to provide some protection. We already spoke to the police, Sam said. But we didn't mention Tony Russo by name. Then we need to do that, Patricia insisted. And we need to find a way to pay off the debt. We don't have that kind of money, I said, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I might be able to help with that, Patricia said, her voice hesitant. I've been saving up for a rainy day, and this certainly qualifies. Mom, you can't, I protested. That's your money. And you're my family, Patricia said firmly. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at my mother, her determination unwavering. Thank you, Mom. We'll get through this, Patricia said, her voice filled with conviction. Together, as we continued to discuss our plan, I felt a sense of resolve building inside me. We would face this challenge head-on, and we would come out stronger on the other side. Later that evening, as I was putting Ben to bed, he looked up at me with wide eyes. Mom, are we going to be okay? Yes, sweetheart, I said, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. We're going to be just fine. Promise? Ben asked, his voice small. I promise, I said, kissing his forehead. Good night, Ben. Good night, Mom, he replied, snuggling into his blankets. As I closed his door, I felt a surge of determination. We would find a way to pay off the debt, and we would protect our family from Tony Russo and his men. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. That night, as I lay in bed next to Sam, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. But I also knew that we were stronger together, and we would face whatever came our way. We'll get through this, Sam said softly, his hand gently holding mine. I know, I replied, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. We'll figure it out. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held. But no matter what happened, I knew we would face it together as a family. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Sam and I worked tirelessly to gather the money needed to pay off Tony Russo. Patricia, true to her word, contributed a significant amount from her savings, and Sam managed to secure a loan from his boss. It wasn't easy, but we were making progress. One evening, as we were finalizing the details, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Sophie standing there, looking more anxious than ever. Emma, we need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. What now? I asked, feeling a mix of frustration and concern. It's James, Sophie said, tears welling up in her eyes. He's gone. Gone? What do you mean? I demanded, my heart pounding. He went to meet Tony Russo, Sophie explained, her voice breaking. He thought he could negotiate with him, but he hasn't come back. I felt a surge of panic. Why didn't you stop him? I tried, Sophie sobbed, but he wouldn't listen. He said he needed to fix this. I turned to Sam, who was already grabbing his keys. We need to find him. Let's go, Sam said, his voice steady but urgent. We drove to the address Sophie had given us, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place looked deserted, but I knew better than to trust appearances. Stay here, Sam instructed as we pulled up. I'll go inside. No way, I said, my voice firm. We're in this together. Sam hesitated, then nodded. All right, but stay close. We entered the warehouse, the dim lighting casting eerie shadows on the walls. My heart raced as we moved through the maze of corridors, searching for any sign of James. Suddenly, we heard voices coming from a room up ahead. We crept closer, and I could make out Tony Russo's menacing tone. You're making a big mistake, James, Tony said, his voice cold. You can't just walk away from this. I'm not walking away, James replied, his voice shaky but determined. I came to make a deal. And what makes you think I'm interested in a deal? Tony sneered. Because if you don't, the police will be all over this place, James said, trying to sound confident. I've already tipped them off. I held my breath, praying James knew what he was doing. You're bluffing, Tony said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Am I? James challenged. Do you really want to take that chance? There was a tense silence, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on us. All right, Tony said finally. I'll give you one last chance. But if you cross me again, there won't be a next time. Understood, James said, his relief palpable. As Tony's men escorted James out of the room, Sam and I stepped forward. James! I called, my voice echoing through the warehouse. James looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. Emma? Sam? What are you doing here? We came to find you, I said, rushing to his side. Are you okay? I'm fine, James said, though he looked shaken. Let's get out of here. We hurried back to the car, my heart still pounding from the tension. As we drove away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and anger. What were you thinking, James? I demanded, my voice trembling. You could have been killed. I had to do something, James said, his voice weary. I couldn't just sit back and let you all risk everything for my mistakes. We're a family, I said, my anger giving way to a surge of emotion. We face things together. James nodded, tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, Emma. I really am. We'll talk about this later, Sam said, his voice calm but firm. Right now, we need to get home and figure out our next steps. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt a sense of exhaustion wash over me. But there was also a glimmer of hope. We had faced a major crisis and come out the other side, but I knew the hardest part was still ahead. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was hanging by a thread. We were so close to resolving this nightmare, but one wrong move could bring it all crashing down. We'll get through this, Sam said softly, his hand gently holding mine. I know, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. But it's not over yet. As I drifted off to sleep, I knew that the next few days would be crucial. We had to find a way to pay off Tony Russo and ensure our family's safety. It was a daunting task, but I was determined to see it through, no matter what it took. The tension in our home was palpable as we prepared to meet Tony Russo and settle the debt once and for all. The money was gathered, but the fear of what might happen next loomed over us like a dark cloud. I could barely focus, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The night before the meeting, I found Sophie sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. I sat down next to her, the weight of our shared history pressing down on us. Sophie, are you sure you're ready for this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. I have to be. This is our only chance to make things right. Just remember, I said, taking her hand. We're in this together. No more secrets. No more secrets, she echoed, squeezing my hand. The next morning, we gathered in the kitchen for a final rundown. Sam had contacted the police, ensuring they were aware of the meeting and would be nearby in case things went south. Patricia was staying with Ben, keeping him safe and away from the impending danger. All right, everyone knows the plan, Sam said, his voice steady. We go in, hand over the money, and get out. No unnecessary risks. James nodded, his face pale but resolute. Let's do this. We drove in silence to the agreed-upon location, an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town. As we pulled in, I spotted Tony Russo and his men waiting, their expressions cold and calculating. Stay close, Sam whispered as we stepped out of the car. Tony approached us, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. You got the money? We have it, I said, holding up the briefcase. But we need assurances that this ends here. Tony smirked, his gaze shifting to Sophie and James. You two have caused me a lot of trouble. But money talks. Hand it over. I took a deep breath, stepping forward and placing the briefcase in Tony's hands. "This is everything. Now leave us alone." Tony opened the briefcase, his eyes gleaming as he counted the money. "Looks like we're done here," he said, snapping it shut. "But remember, if you ever cross me again, there won't be a next time." "We understand," James said, his voice trembling. As Tony and his men turned to leave, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over. We had done it. But just as I was about to breathe easy, one of Tony's men suddenly grabbed Sophie, pulling her close and holding a knife to her throat. "Not so fast," he snarled. "I think we deserve a little bonus for our trouble." Panic surged through me as I watched Sophie struggle, her eyes wide with terror. "Let her go," I shouted, my voice breaking. "Or what?" the man taunted, pressing the knife closer to Sophie's skin. Before I could react, Sam lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground. The knife clattered away, and Sophie stumbled back into my arms, sobbing. "Get out of here," Tony barked at his men, clearly shaken by the turn of events. "Now!" They scrambled to their feet, retreating to their cars and speeding away. As the dust settled, I turned to Sam, who was breathing heavily but otherwise unharmed. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm fine," he said, pulling me into a tight embrace. "It's over." I held on to him, my heart still racing. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. As we drove home, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. We had faced our greatest challenge yet and come out the other side. But the scars would take time to heal. Back at the house, Patricia and Ben were waiting anxiously. When we walked through the door, Ben ran to me, his eyes wide with worry. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, clinging to me. "I'm okay, sweetheart," I said, hugging him tightly. "We're all okay." Patricia looked at us, her eyes filled with relief. "Thank God you're safe." "We did it, Mom," I said, my voice breaking. "It's over." As we sat down together, the weight of the past few weeks began to lift. We had faced our darkest hour and come out stronger on the other side. But I knew there was still one final step to take. "Sophie, James," I said, turning to them. "We need to talk." They looked at me, their expressions a mix of gratitude and apprehension. "We know," Sophie said quietly. "We owe you an explanation." "And more," I said, my voice firm. "From now on, things are going to be different." As we began to lay out the terms of our new understanding, I felt a sense of empowerment. We had faced our greatest challenge and come out stronger. Now it was time to rebuild together. The days following our confrontation with Tony Russo were a blur of tension and relief. We had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation, but the aftermath still loomed over us. Sophie and James were staying with us until we could figure out a more permanent solution, and the atmosphere in the house was thick with unspoken words and unresolved issues. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, I decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "Sophie, James," I began, looking them both in the eye, "we need to talk about what happens next." They exchanged a wary glance before nodding. "We know," Sophie said quietly. "We owe you so much, and we want to make things right." "That's a start," I said, my voice firm. "But it's not just about paying back the money. It's about rebuilding trust and taking responsibility for your actions." "We understand," James said, his voice filled with regret. "And we're willing to do whatever it takes." "Good," I replied, "because there are going to be some conditions." I laid out the terms. They would need to find jobs and start contributing to their own expenses. They would also need to attend counseling to address the issues that had led them down this path. Most importantly, they had to sign a pledge to never interfere in my life again. "This is non-negotiable," I said, sliding the pledge across the table. "If you break any of these conditions, you're on your own." Sophie and James looked at each other, then back at me. "We agree," Sophie said, her voice steady. "We'll sign." As they signed the pledge, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a step in the right direction. The next few weeks were a period of adjustment. Sophie and James found temporary jobs, and we helped them look for a place of their own. Patricia was a constant source of support, her presence a calming influence in the midst of the chaos. One afternoon, as I was packing up some boxes in the living room, Sam walked in with a serious expression. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, sitting down next to me. "What is it?" I asked, my heart sinking. "I got a call from work," he said. "They want to transfer me to a new branch. It's a great opportunity, but it means we would have to move." I took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. "Where would we go?" "Chicago," Sam replied. "It's a big change, but it could be a fresh start for all of us." I looked around our home, the place where we had built our life together. The thought of leaving was daunting, but the idea of a new beginning was also appealing. "Let's do it," I said finally, my voice filled with resolve. We could all use a fresh start. As we began to make plans for the move, I felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. It was a chance to leave the past behind and build a new future together. The day of the move arrived quickly. As we loaded the last of the boxes into the truck, Sophie and James came to say goodbye. "Thank you for everything," Sophie said, hugging me tightly. "We wouldn't have made it without you." "Just remember the pledge," I said, my voice firm but kind. "And take care of each other." "We will," James said, shaking Sam's hand. "Good luck in Chicago." As we drove away, I looked back at the house one last time. It was the end of a chapter, but also the beginning of a new one. In Chicago, we settled into our new home, the city offering a sense of possibility and renewal. Ben adjusted quickly, making new friends and embracing the adventure. Sam's new job was challenging but rewarding, and our relationship grew even stronger as we navigated this new phase of our life together. One evening, as we sat on our balcony overlooking the city, I felt a sense of peace and contentment. We had faced incredible challenges and come out stronger on the other side. The past was behind us, and the future was filled with promise. "We did it," I said, leaning into Sam's embrace. "We made it through." "We did," Sam replied, his voice filled with pride. "And we'll keep moving forward together." As I looked out at the city lights, I knew that we had found our way back to each other, stronger and more resilient than ever. The journey had been difficult, but it had also brought us closer together. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together as a family.